Most people think of homelessness as someone sleeping on the streets, often struggling with addiction. But that's not the whole picture. In reality, the most common form of homelessness is people living in temporary housing, like shelters or hostels. This is because they can't afford a regular home. Surprisingly, the United States isn't even the worst country for this type of homelessness. The UK actually has it much worse. There, a staggering 1 in 200 households find themselves in temporary housing, outside the normal housing market. Temporary housing might seem less serious than sleeping rough, but it's still a major problem. Across developed countries, it makes up over 80% of homelessness. Hundreds of thousands of people are stuck in this unstable situation. The situation in Britain is particularly concerning. The number of households in temporary accommodation has more than doubled in the past decade, reaching a record high of over 112,000 in 2023. This means a growing number of people are living in insecure and fragile situations. The situation is even worse in other parts of the UK, although the data from England is the most comprehensive. Conditions in temporary housing are often awful, with damp, mold, and pests being common problems. This constant moving around also disrupts people's lives. Adults struggle to keep jobs, and children miss out on schooling. Tragically, poor conditions in temporary housing have been linked to the deaths of 55 children in England alone over the past 5 years. These temporary arrangements are also incredibly expensive. Local councils spend nearly £18 billion on emergency shelters last year, which is more than double what they were spending a decade ago. So what's causing this nightmarish scenario? There are 3 main reasons. A lack of affordable housing being built. The UK simply isn't building enough homes for its growing population. A shrinking social housing sector. Social housing used to be a safety net for people who couldn't afford private rent. But the sector has shrunk by 25% since the 1970s. Cuts to financial support. There's less financial help available for those struggling to afford rent in the private market. The lack of affordable housing is a major problem. The UK builds far fewer homes compared to other developed countries. This has caused private rents to skyrocket. Additionally, the social housing sector has shrunk by a quarter since the 1970s, taking away a crucial safety net. Children are especially affected by homelessness. Across the UK, the number of children living in temporary accommodation is rising. In England alone, a record 14,800 children were homeless in 2024, a 15% increase from the previous year. Scotland has also seen a 10% rise, with nearly 45 children becoming homeless every single day. Although official statistics estimate around 15 homeless people per 100,000 across the UK, the situation might be even worse. Some areas, especially rural cities, are experiencing a surge in rough sleepers, with rates even exceeding London. Places like Boston and Lincolnshire have seen as many as 38 homeless people per 100,000, highlighting the geographical disparity in the crisis. Several factors are pushing people onto the streets. Soaring house prices make finding affordable housing nearly impossible, while wages remain stagnant. The social housing sector, once a safety net, has shrunk significantly, leaving huge waiting lists with little hope of fulfillment. The rise of short-term rentals like Airbnb further reduces the availability of long-term housing options. To top it all off, high inflation rates are squeezing household budgets even tighter, making essentials like food and energy even more expensive. Experts predict this crisis will worsen. With Christmas approaching, estimates suggest homelessness rates could be 14% higher than last year, potentially leaving close to 310,000 people homeless across the UK. The public is demanding change. People are calling on the government to take action by building millions more homes, particularly in areas with severe shortages. Additionally, there's a push to redefine affordable housing, so it reflects local incomes and makes housing truly accessible. The lack of affordable housing and limited support systems are creating a critical situation. Homelessness is rising across the UK, and decisive action is needed to prevent this crisis from spiraling further out of control. The situation seems bleak, with researchers predicting it could take a staggering 50 years to fix. The housing crisis based on the government's current goal of building 300,000 homes annually. However, falling far short of this target, only 191,800 new homes were registered across Britain in 2022. This shortfall is reflected in the stark rise in homelessness, a 16% jump in England alone during the last year. Nearly 45,000 households found themselves with nowhere to live in just the last 3 months of 2023, and the number of people, including children, forced into temporary accommodation has hit record highs. Critics like Shadow Minister for Homelessness Mike Amsbury argue this is a Tory housing emergency, impacting families nationwide. He accuses the government of neglecting a foundation of a secure home, leaving Britain facing a homelessness epidemic. Amsbury paints a grim picture of children living in temporary accommodation, doing homework on bathroom floors and eating dinner on their beds. He blames decades of failing to build enough affordable social housing, forcing families to struggle with extortionate rents or face homelessness and years of temporary housing with no permanent solution in sight. The government, however, defends its record. The Department for Levelling Up claims they are committed to providing everyone with a safe home. They point to a $12 billion investment to support councils in providing financial assistance to those needing to find new homes and move out of temporary accommodation. Additionally, they've boosted the local housing allowance by £800 for 1.6 million private renters receiving housing benefit or universal credit, aiming to help them manage rental costs. The government's promises haven't translated into reality. Back in 2019, they pledged to build 300,000 additional homes annually by the mid-2020s to address housing shortages and soaring prices. However, last year saw only 234,400 new homes added to England's stock, falling short of the target and unlikely to reach it by 2025, according to MPs. Experts point to a key factor: the government's decision to scrap mandatory population-based targets for local authorities, a move influenced by a conservative backbench rebellion from suburban and rural areas. Meanwhile, the situation for renters is worsening. The number of people facing homelessness due to no-fault evictions reached a record 24,910 in 2023. The Conservatives had initially promised to ban these evictions altogether, but later amended their Renters Reform Bill to indefinitely postpone this ban. Their justification? The court system supposedly needs to be prepared for a potential surge in cases. This delay, combined with a steady rise in evictions every week, puts further strain on council budgets already stretched thin by the growing cost of homelessness support. It's a maddening situation. While the crisis spirals, the government's approach to the Renters Reform Bill, a crucial tool to address the issue, remains sluggish and unclear. The human cost is evident in Northern Ireland, where statistics from July 2023 show nearly 4,600 children living in temporary accommodation. Almost 3,000 of these children are under 9 years old, representing an alarming 88% increase since 2019. Homelessness can strike for a variety of reasons. Financial hardship is a major trigger, with people unable to afford rent or mortgage payments facing eviction. Job loss, rising living costs, and the lack of affordable housing all contribute to this vulnerability. Every story of homelessness is unique, and the reasons behind it complex. It's important to remember that homelessness is rarely a choice, and for children it takes on an even more critical dimension. Thankfully, in the UK, no child under 16 can be legally left without a roof over their heads. If a family with young children faces eviction, their local council is obligated to provide temporary accommodation. The impact of homelessness extends far beyond a lack of shelter. Globally, homeless populations are 3 to 4 times more likely to die compared to the general population. Despite variations in how different countries measure homelessness-related deaths, a disturbing consistency emerges in mortality rates, a grim reality that transcends borders and cultures. Research shows that homeless adults and children are more susceptible to underlying health issues than the housed population. They are also disproportionately at risk of violent accidents, such as being struck by vehicles. Shockingly, until 2018, the UK government didn't track the number of deaths amongst the homeless population. It wasn't until a collaborative effort, the Dying Homeless Project, led by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism and journalist May McLaughlin, Working with the London-based Museum of Homelessness exposed the true extent of this unseen tragedy that the government finally began to acknowledge.